Welcome to Manchester, where in half an hour's time, Rishi Sunak will make his big speech to party conference. This is Politics Live. Joining me here in Manchester, Conservative MP Bim Afalami, The Times' Lara Spirit, Henry Hill from Conservative Home, and our political editor, Chris Mason. I think we can show you now Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, accompanied by his wife. There they are, Akshata Murthy, making their way in the sunshine. It's come out, finally, in Manchester, up the steps to the conference hall ahead of his big speech. It's the traditional photo opportunity at the annual conference. And this, of course, is Rishi Sunak's first conference speech to his party faithful and MPs. It could, of course, possibly be his last as Prime Minister before a general election next year. Certainly all smiles now. And the shadow, if you like, over this whole conference has been the Prime Minister's refusal to answer the big question about the high-speed rail line, which we now know is not going to continue from Birmingham on to Manchester. But we will hear all of the detail in his speech. Chris Mason, how would you assess this conference for Rishi Sunak? You spoke to him yesterday. What was his mood?
I think what's been striking this week, well, firstly, there's the obvious point we should make, which in contrast to last year, it's felt conventional as opposed to explosive in the way that last year was. I've been struck that prior to today, at least, the speeches from the conference floor for ministers have felt relatively low-key. That's not to say there haven't been announcements, there have, but relatively low-key. And that's perhaps magnified the relative volume, if you like, attached to some of the noises off, whether that be Andy Street, the Conservative Mayor of the West Midlands, and his arguments around HS2, or the arrival with great fanfare of Liz Truss the other day. But I think part of the strategy from the government's perspective was to leave the big moment to now. In other words, that the announcements would come in the Prime Minister's speech. I just had a text from a minister who says they've been fully briefed on what we're about to hear. Insert caveat that little bits of spin and expectation management go on prior to us actually hearing speeches. But this person saying that this would be a transformational moment for the Prime Minister with more big economic and social announcements than we are accustomed to.
Well, raising expectations, let's put it that way. You're right about putting it into context compared to last year. It seems such a long time ago. And one of the big questions that Rishi Sunak has had to answer throughout his relatively short tenure thus far is the mandate. Is that the people that he's addressing, huge queue, and we'll hear from some of those in a moment who are waiting outside to hear him speak, is that many of them didn't choose him to be their leader. You know, who and where is his mandate from?
Yeah, I was just talking to a former cabinet minister who said it's a little bit rich to suggest that all of your predecessors were, and I'm going to use the word rubbish, which wasn't quite the word that this person used, when you haven't got a mandate. Equally, if you are the Prime Minister and you've had a year of steadying the ship, you've lasted a year, which is considerably longer than your immediate predecessor, and nobody suggests that the government is in any kind of peril prior to the general election. But the polls are still sticky and you're miles behind, and if nothing else changes, it looks like you're going to lose. Then if you and your team around you look at that scenario, which is what they have done, and come to that conclusion, which they have done, you're going to do something different. And Rishi Sunak has long been frustrated that political circumstances meant that he feels the country's never seen the real him politically. He had to manage the pandemic, he had to manage the politics of chaos. Now he wants to do what he really believes in.
Well, let's see members of the Cabinet there, James Cleverly, the Foreign Secretary, Suella Braverman. We've heard quite a bit from her, and we'll talk about her if we have time a little later, the Home Secretary, Grant Shapps, Steve Barclay coming in, the Health Secretary. Anyway, they're all filing in for this big speech. But to go back to, Chris, your theme about what people know about Rishi Sunak, this idea of being the change candidate, this word that we've heard, as you said, 13 years of Conservative governments of different stripes. Is it convincing that he can be the change candidate?
Well, it's difficult, isn't it, when you want to be the change candidate, when you are sort of Prime Minister number 5 in a 13-year run in power. But if you're Rishi Sunak, what's the alternative? You need to do something. And his argument will be, and we'll hear this in the speech, is that Keir Starmer and Labour, their instinct is to almost be small c Conservative, to not want to say very much, to be very reticent to say anything bold. And their argument is, if you go into an election and make a pitch that you are the agent of change and your opponent lacks ideas, lacks spark, this will be the argument that we will hear, that gives you the best chance of being competitive, and also forces your opponents, forces Labour in this instance, to say stuff. So what are they going to do about HS2? Will they commit to maintaining the northern leg with the bills attached or not?
Right.
And everything else that we hear from the Prime Minister, it forces Labour to take a position.
We'll talk about HS2 in just a moment and catch up on precisely what we know is or isn't going to happen. But Bim, let me get your response on the issue of him being a change candidate. There is a big problem at the heart of him saying he is the change candidate, because it sort of trashes the record of previous Conservative governments, of which he was a part, certainly in the last few years, and saying we got it wrong.
Look, we all know, as is everybody watching, that the last few years have been very, very, very chaotic in British politics. The last year, obviously, we steadied the ship, as Chris said. What the Prime Minister is right in doing is not, I'm afraid, just looking at the Conservative governments of David Cameron, Theresa May, etc., but actually thinking of politics over the last 30 years, not just the last 13 years, the last 30 years, and thinking about whether, and I don't know if this is going to work, but thinking about, is there a chance that this country can do politics differently now with him as leader than we've done for a generation? Well, that is the change that we need, not just a change from Boris Johnson or Liz Truss or whatever.
Well, OK, well, let's take that example. Let's take HS2, high-speed rail. Let's just show our viewers and our guests here that map. And broadly speaking, it is the map of high-speed rail, certainly from London to Birmingham, that we know is underway and is going to be completed. You can see it sort of shoots out the Green Line a little bit beyond Birmingham. But tell us, Chris, what isn't going to happen?
Well, that dotted line that we can see just north of Birmingham up towards Crewe and then on to Manchester, or indeed the other way if you're travelling south, that's the bit that is going to go. I think what is crucial and will be central to the kind of post-match analysis, because the nature of how this has come about, there was that snatched photo by Steve Back, the brilliant political photographer, 3 weeks ago, revealing that this conversation was going on in government. What happens when you get leaks like this is opponents of what a government is planning can get out first and publicly make their argument, whilst the government in this instance is still trying to work out precisely what it's going to do. They've had to accelerate their decision-making about their alternatives because the time frame originally was towards the autumn statement, which is mid to late November.
Yes.
And then you could decide what you're doing privately, to use the political line, roll the pitch a bit in terms of what you're going to do, talk to people in advance, start trailing the ideas that you've got as an alternative. Instead, everything's happened in reverse. But crucially, I think, in terms of how this goes down, yes, there will be some who are furious and there'll be some who will be delighted. But what are the other ideas? So what happens to east-west connections in the north of England? What happens to suburban connections in the West Midlands? What happens in Wales? I suspect there'll be something in there for Wales. Plenty in Wales have often said HS2 is a very English project.
Yes.
So how is the alternative packaged up and sold, and on with what cost basis, and how quickly can it be delivered relative to HS2 will be key.
Well, and those will be the questions, I presume, the rationale being given by the Prime Minister. I think the warm-up speech is still continuing inside the hall. We can dip in and have a look, being given by Penny Mordaunt, Leader of the House. There she is, a popular figure in the party and, of course, a former leadership contender themselves. And many would say this, to some extent, has been a bit of a beauty contest this week for potential future leaders of the party.
I hear, for this particular speech.
Oh, has she? A bit of stand-up just
I don't know what she's saying, but that's what I hear was part of the part of the process. If you're doing the warm-up for the Prime Minister, big political speech, you need to get the crowd going, throw in a few one-liners.
She's quite good at it in the House of Commons too, isn't she, in terms of holding forth.
And she gave a speech to the Parliamentary Press Gallery a few months ago, which was very, very well turned and very funny.
Oh,
so,
was it?
I don't know if she'd written it herself or somebody else had on her behalf. I don't know, but it was a good one.
Well, she delivered it well. Chris Mason, thank you very much for joining us. I know you have got to get into the hall and take your place before the video that we're expecting, the traditional video ahead of the Prime Minister taking to his feet. Henry, you've been here all week. You've been watching this conference unfold. Are you convinced by the change candidate, Rishi Sunak?
It will be remarkable if he pulls it off, and I'm prepared to be surprised. The Conservatives have done this before, right? I mean, if you think 2010, David Cameron was elected, they've changed leader and direction several times and effectively reset with the British public. So they can do it. I think when you've done it this many times, it becomes increasingly difficult to keep doing it, but Rishi Sunak might. I think the problem so far is that we've had all of these policy announcements. Part of the problem is that they've leaked, so they haven't managed it. But they all seem a bit bitty. I'm sure they've been focus grouped to death, but there doesn't seem to be an overarching narrative or script that guides them together. And I think it's telling that Rishi Sunak says, oh, we're going to see the real him, that I actually have no idea what that might look like, really. All he's done so far is cut stuff. And the most important thing about Rishi, I think, that is important to remember is he hit the height of his popularity as Chancellor during the pandemic when he was doing stuff that he hated doing. And I don't think that when we've seen the real Rishi and he's had a chance to use his own political judgment, that that's necessarily been all that popular. So it will be interesting to see whether or not the Rishi that emerges in this speech is able to recapture some of that magic from when he was just hosing money at the nation.
Right, and as you say, that's when you're most popular.
Absolutely.
I mean, we can see people going into the hall, Lara, because, of course, as always, with these conference speeches, it's not just to the people gathered inside the hall, many of whom he was not their first choice, or their choice at all, perhaps, to become leader of the Conservative Party. But it's also the wider electorate outside. He's got to make a pitch to them.
Yes, and indeed this is his, second phase of leadership, so to speak. We had the stabilising phase, we had him setting out his 5 key priorities at the beginning of the year, saying that these were the things he was going to be focused on. Now, we're going to have a speech running to almost an hour long today, at which we'll see the so-called vision thing. And like Henry says, so far these have been seen in some senses to be sort of disaggregated policies in different parts of government and different platforms. Is he going to be able to bring it into a coherent whole, not just for the people here, not just for the party faithful, though their reaction will be important, and it's important that many people heading in there right now, because, of course, given train strikes, there was that initial concern about would they even be able to fill the hall. But it is also crucial that he uses this opportunity to speak to the wider electorate and for them to be able to gauge what it is that he stands for too.
We're going to hear from people who've been queuing outside, but briefly, Bim, how much of a betrayal is this announcement that HS2 high-speed rail will not go ahead from Birmingham to Manchester?
I don't think betrayal is what I'd say. I think it's a shame that as a country we found it so difficult to control the costs and get something like this
government.
Well, it was actually, the original project was conceived by the Labour government in Gordon Brown's administration. But yes, we've been, obviously in government for the last 13 years with it. I think that, however, we are where we are. And the key thing, as Chris said earlier, is how are we going to deliver positive projects in the north, east-west links, Wales, etc. I don't know what's in the speech, but I'm sure there will be, and I've been assured, there will be a lot of detail as to what the alternatives are to HS2. It's really, really important, as I say, I repeat, as a country, we don't give up on doing big projects, but at the same time, you've got to be brave enough to say, sometimes things don't work, and you've got to say, look, we're going to change course. And I think that that bravery may not be popular. I'm not sitting here saying everybody's going to love this announcement. I'm pretty sure it may not even poll very well. But if that's the right thing to do, then we have to do it and show people that we're doing it for the right reason for the long term. And I think that that is what Rishi has to do today.
All right, well, we haven't got long until the Prime Minister's speech. I think Penny Mordaunt's still telling jokes, apparently, to gathered members inside the hall. There she is, bestriding the stage ahead of the Prime Minister. Well, my colleague Helen Catt has been talking to members gathered outside.
Thanks, Jo. And there are plenty of people who seem pretty keen to hear what Rishi Sunak's got to say this morning. The queue, you can see, is going quite a long way back around the auditorium. So we'll find out, I think, a few reasons why. Excuse me, from Politics Live on the BBC. What are you hoping to hear from Rishi Sunak this morning?
Well, look, Rishi's been around in lots of events all week and he's shown so much energy, so I suspect there'll be much more energy even today, and we're really positive about it. Look, all of us have been queuing for a long time because we want to support him. Because we support him and we are unified and we're very energetic, and he's going to do more of that today, and so we're very optimistic about that. Yeah.
And what are you wanting to hear from him? We'll just ask this gentleman here. What do you want to hear in terms of policy? What do you want to hear from him, or you just want to hear something feel good? What do you want?
No, not the feel good thing. I want to hear the real substance from the Rishi, the kind of.
You can look at me.
All right, so the kind of the tough decisions Rishi can take. So those kind of decisions I'm ready to hear from Rishi. For example, like halving the inflation. That's one of the major things. It's affecting everyone's life. So every day-to-day life of people are affected. Those kind of things I'm trying to hear from the Rishi.
And do you want to hear anything new? Because obviously we've heard a lot about halving inflation from him. What new do you want to hear him say?
The new are the things, tough decisions, for example. Those people are afraid to say. So those kind of decisions I would like to hear from her. Like, for example, yesterday we heard about the immigration kind of things, which are affecting everyone's life. The public services are being stretched. So those are tough decisions. Not everyone is ready to talk. So those kind of decisions I would like to hear from Rishi as well.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Well, enjoy your queuing if you can for the next bit. We're just going to ask a few other people. If we follow down the queue a little bit further, let's see if there's anyone else we can have a chat to. About, excuse me, can I have a quick chat? We're from BBC Politics Live, just trying to find out what do you want to hear from Rishi Sunak in his speech?
Oh, hi. Yes, I think people are looking for some hope. People are looking for some hope, and we really want Rishi to connect with the ordinary voters. You know, I know he's providing a bold and tough leadership, making some long-term decisions for the countries. People want to hear some quick fixes as well, given the crisis of the food inflation and all that. I know his pledges are good, and he's making great progress towards it.
And what do you think he's got to say to be able to connect with people?
Yeah, he's the Prime Minister of the country, and he's had a great conference here, and the whole Tory party is well behind him, and we want to see him out and about in the country and connect with the ordinary voters, what their issues are, and I know he's working 24/7 and along with his diverse cabinet, but we need to see more of it, and people really want quick results. They do. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we'll just keep going down this way a bit further. Let's see if there's a nice lady to talk to. Hello, from BBC Politics Live.
Hi.
Hello. Just wanted to ask, what do you want to hear from Rishi Sunak when he gets up in the hall?
I want to see what he's got to offer for us, and what's coming up with it when we have the general election. So I just want to see what policies he's going to announce today.
And is there anything that's a particular concern or interest to you?
At the minute, stop debates, I think, is the main one for me at the moment.
And do you want to hear something new on that, or do you just want to renew commitment?
I just want to see where we are in the progress. I think they've done a lot of work in the background that I'm hoping will have some action in the next couple of months. So I'm just hoping for an update on where we are with that.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much. As you can see, there's a bit of a wait, I think, still ahead, and we'll have to find out what he says, Jo.
Thank you very much, Helen. A flavour there of what people want to hear or expecting to hear from the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak. Lara, you mentioned the 5 pledges, the 5 missions that Rishi Sunak has set out. You would expect him also, as a former Chancellor, to talk a lot about the economy, particularly in the situation, the sort of financial situation that the country is in at the moment. But let me welcome Nick Eardley, political correspondent at the BBC. Nick, we heard from Chris, transformational this speech is being billed as, with an awful lot of announcements. That is raising expectations quite high, isn't it, as to what we can expect?
They've set a high bar, haven't they? And it was interesting chatting to cabinet ministers and to Tory politicians around the conference last night. They all thought that this is a proper Big Bang moment where you get Rishi Sunak 2.0, when you start to see his big vision. And I suppose the question we're going to be asking in an hour's time is, did he deliver it? It's a really big test for him. It's probably one of the most important speeches he'll ever give, because this is the moment where he wants to move from being the manager, the guy who helped secure the economy after a turbulent time, to the inspirational leader who can lead the party into a general election. And as you heard from Helen speaking to members there, that's what they want as well.
Yes, and they want to see, as you said, Henry, the sort of true Rishi Sunak. Let's go briefly back into the hall, because I think we're expecting the Prime Minister to get to his feet, take to the stage. All smiles there. Steve Barclay, the Health Secretary. Or is it a little bit more of a grimace? I can't quite tell. But in about 5 or so minutes' time, and he's expected to speak, the Prime Minister, after Penny Mordaunt and a video and perhaps a little bit more warm-up ahead of him going onto the stage, but he's expected to speak for about 55 minutes. So, yes, plenty of time for lots of announcement. What's the one thing he needs to do, Bim Afellami? I mean, how does he explain himself to the electorate?
I think he's got to put meat on the bones of the long-term plan. And I don't necessarily go in for the whole, everybody needs to be a sort of inspiring, visionary prophet for the next 30 years. But I think he does need to show what the Conservative Party is about after a period of really 3-4 years of turbulence, and what is his plan for the long term. But at the same time, satisfy that difficult thing of democracy, where you've got to win elections as well over the next year. And how you do both of those things in the same speech, I think, is a real challenge.
Right. I mean, Lara, do you think, having spoken to lots of people this week, no doubt, that there is a belief that the Conservatives can win still the next election?
That's a really interesting question, because I would say they're split between some of the MPs that you speak to here who have seen a few recent polls that show that perhaps there's been a slight narrowing in the Labour lead over the Conservatives as a kind of potential indication that maybe recent announcements on net zero from Rishi Sunak, maybe recent announcements from Sir Keir Starmer on migration that they feel aren't so popular or could be the source of future attacks from Rishi Sunak if he's able to capitalise on them effectively. I mean, maybe there's a narrow path to victory. And then you speak to other people, including, ministers who will be a bit more candid, and they'll say, actually, it's a really steep hill to climb and the odds remain very, very strongly against us. And that's what Rishi Sunak needs to deal with, is the sense that among quite a lot of his own, even party faithful and even loyal allies, they feel that actually after 13 years in power, it's just going to be too difficult a task for him to secure.
Well, one speech that was certainly, like by Quentin Letts in the Daily Mail, Henry, is the speech by Suella Braverman. What a wig lifter, it says. This was the first properly spellbinding, dramatically assured speech seen at a conference for years. Not everyone agreed, particularly with the language. What was your view?
No, I mean, it's in exactly the same vein as that speech she gave in Washington about refugees, which I read about for Conservative Home. And I think the thing about Suella Braverman is it's very obvious positioning for a post-election leadership contest at this point, right? Because that speech, the irritating thing is there are important points to make about refugee law, there are important points to make about multiculturalism, there are important to make, but they're not the same issue. And it's lumping it. It felt like something from the 90s, right? I thought the Conservatives had got beyond that kind of clumsiness on these issues, treating refugees, legal immigration, illegal immigration and multiculturalism as the same topic. It was a huge step backwards, and I'm very disappointed that she's continuing to indulge it.
I mean, what did you make of the language? It was called incendiary by some of your colleagues. She, the Home Secretary, is criticising what she calls the hurricane of immigration. And under the Conservatives, net migration has reached a record high of 606,000 last year. She's criticising her own party's record.
Well, I think it's important, if you are, responsible for migration and all of these issues as Home Secretary, that you focus on the delivery of what you're doing, not treating politics entirely as a commentator. At the same time, she's achieved the aim which she wanted to do, which is to generate a debate on these subjects. The fact that people for the last 2 days have been talking about it, to some degree, has achieved the aim. The media has sort of taken the bait, so to speak. My personal view is that we've got to be very, very, very careful as a party to not be seen as going backwards in areas where we have made huge strides as a country and huge strides as a party ourselves. And I just think that, what she largely said in practical detail terms is fine, but if you use rhetoric that's designed to excite or inflame, then that can cause problems. So I really think we've just got to be very careful over the next few weeks and months as a party to make sure we hold the centre line on that subject.
Right, but I mean, what are the practical details in terms of tackling this issue?
Oh, I mean, it's for example, let's just take illegal migration.
Illegal?
Illegal migration. It is clear that this is a Europe-wide issue that every single European country is struggling with, and it's also clear that the conventions that the UN has put in place for a very long time need discussion and updating. I think that that is a reasonable point to make.
Well, including signing up to the European Convention on Human Rights.
Well, it's interesting, the European Convention. There's been talk about this a lot this week. The issue is, in my view, is not the European Convention on Human Rights. It's the application of the European Convention in domestic law, and that is a pretty complicated thing that people like Lord Sumption have commented on, lots of people like Sir Robert Buckland, who both eminent lawyers. It's pretty detail-oriented. It will really depend on what happens with the judgment that comes back in a few weeks on Rwanda. I think what the media will be desperate to find is it's either allowed or it's not allowed. And what they're likely to get is something that is much more nuanced and detail-complicated.
Nick?
That's right, actually. I think, from what I understand from Cabinet, legal officers are pretty confident, actually, in the Rwanda case, which is a shift from a few weeks ago when they weren't so confident. But do you agree that if the government loses that case, this debate about the EHCR, which cabinet ministers are happy to flirt with on a daily basis at the moment, that is going to explode, and there's a realistic chance your party could campaign to leave at the general election?
Well, look, I think the debate will explode. I think you're right. We also have other international obligations, in particular the Good Friday Agreement. There are others, the agreement we signed with the European Union, the Trade and Cooperation Agreement with the European Union. So, yes, I'm all for looking at ways of changing how we apply the ECHR in British law, because a lot of the judgments that come out of Strasbourg, a lot of countries, not just us, the French, the Germans, various other countries, are very unhappy with some of these judgments. But it's about how we apply that in a way that is sensible and can satisfy all of our international obligations. We shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Just to let our viewers know that Penny Mordaunt, the Leader of the House of Commons, being clapped there, applauded by Cabinet Ministers, she's just wrapped up her warm-up speech. We can expect there to be a video, again, ahead of Rishi Sunak taking to the stage in a few minutes' time to make his big conference speech, making his pitch to the party faithful, many of whom didn't choose it. Here is the Veterans Minister, Johnny Mercer, coming to the stage. He's obviously going to talk for a couple of moments over that long-term decisions for a brighter future. Let's just sort of discuss that slogan for the conference, Lara. Long-term decisions, and yet, you could say rather simplistically, the decisions that's just been taken by HS2 is a rather short-term decision, cancelling this leg of high-speed rail after all the tens of billions of pounds that have been spent.
Yeah, I think it's important to say that when you speak to allies of Rishi Sunak, they will insist, this is not a decision that is being made to fund pre-election tax giveaways. Most of the money that we're talking about here, the £36 billion reported, won't be available until the 2030s. Rishi Sunak will say that all of that will be reinvested into better links. So I think that's one important thing to say. But of course, he will criticise the kind of wider Westminster broken system that he thinks is hampering the way that we make decisions. The interesting thing to watch with that is I think few people would disagree with the fact that politics can feel quite short-termist. But Rishi Sunak wants to simultaneously tackle that while also setting out to his MPs that he wants to win the election. And so those are two potentially slightly competing incentives here.
Well, I think I agree with Lara. I mean, that is a problem, isn't it? I mean, he's not going to be able to do both.
No, you make long-term decisions, hard decisions in year one of a 5-year parliament. You hope that by year 5 things have recovered. And the problem with the long term is there's two versions of the long term in British politics. One, you actually do difficult decisions now and hope that it pays off later on. The other is it never arrives. Like, of course, we're going to do something about it in the long term. In the short term, we need to win the election. But in the long term, we've got all of these. And I think that's the problem we've had with the Tories, is they keep using the long term as an excuse, keep shunting decisions down the road.
Right. I mean, that includes the announcements on things around net zero, for example, and even actually Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor's speech, the short speech he made at the beginning of the week, when he talked about benefits and how he's going to reform the system. But again, not till 2025, after a general election. It is quite confusing, I would suggest, for people watching to work out exactly what they're trying to do and when.
I think that's very true, Jo. I think with net zero, although the BBC revealed it a day early, there was a real sense that the Prime Minister just grasped an issue, had come up with a plan, it was controversial, but he was going to do it. HS2 feels like it's been a bit shambolic, because we've had we've had weeks of speculation, and then we've had days of a vacuum where critics of the government have just seized upon it and said this is a betrayal of the north of England, and it feels a bit like that set in. So Rishi Sunak has a lot to do over the next hour to persuade, not us, but to persuade the people of the north of England and the public at large that he had a big plan all along that he was just waiting to tell us.
I mean, would you agree it has been shambolic? I mean, in the handling of it. And we can go into the substance again, but in terms of the handling of it...
When something is leaked, it means that your best laid plans go awry. That's what happened.
But it wasn't just leaked. Grant Shapps was on Laura Kuenssberg's programme a couple of Sundays ago, pretty much saying the costs have got too much.
No, but that was after it had got out that government was looking at discussing the subject. Now, when that happens, of course it's messy. Of course it's difficult. Nobody would deny that. But the most important thing, look, in even a week to come, nobody will care about exactly how it came out, who said what, when. The question will be, what is the alternative? How are we doing it? What is our vision for major infrastructure projects? As I said earlier, you know, not just rail, but more broadly, how are we going to get better at this as a country, delivering these projects, and in particular, east-west links in the north, and buses and various other local transport links. That's what I and all of you will be looking for. If we pass that test, I don't think any of the handling and the media stuff is frankly going to matter very much.
Well, you say that, but the political fallout could be quite serious. I mean, let's just take Andy Street, the Conservative mayor of the West Midlands. He is supposed to be, understandably, furious about the decision itself and the way it's been handled. I mean, he could walk, I suppose, over it.
I mean, he could, theoretically. He's got a very nice job as Mayor of the West Midlands. I don't think he still needs to be a Tory to keep doing it. And indeed, you know, if he did want to run again, it's arguable that the Tories' brand is still 20 points behind in the polls. Having taken a stand on something and running as an independent might be good for him. But I think it comes down to, yes, there are a lot of Tory MPs who don't like HS2. And the costs have grown out of control. But if the money's going to come free in the 2030s, Rishi Sunak can't make any promises about how that's going to be spent, can he? Like, so in 10 years' time, when we've got an older population, so the problem is, and again, there's other MPs who think, frankly, this is a national embarrassment. We're here in Manchester announcing the termination of a railway project that this Conservative government committed to because this government has mishandled it so badly that it's quadrupled the costs. It's very difficult to handle that.
I mean, what does it say also about trust? Because there will be an argument made to Rishi Sunak and members of the government and Conservative MPs like Bim. You've broken a sort of promise, if you like. You've done it on other quite key issues to do with raising taxes, for example. Why will we believe anything that you promise now?
It's a really good question, and it kind of ties in with what Bim was saying a few minutes ago about why the management of this matters. Because what's really struck me is there's been a queue of people wanting to appear on the BBC over the last few days to express their fury at being left out of this discussion. Be it Andy Street, the West Midlands mayor, be it those big infrastructure companies that were involved in this, be it business leaders in the north, political leaders in the north of England, rail infrastructure delivery groups. They're all absolutely fizzing at the way this has been handled. And they all say that it will really impact trust and investment in the UK because people feel like the rug's been pulled from beneath them.
Do you agree with that, Laura?
I think it's the last couple of days have been really difficult for the communication on this policy because yesterday we had the strategy from Downing Street, which was have Rishi Sunak do as much media as possible, let him wrest control of the narrative. But actually, he's going to say, you're not going to hear a decision from HS2 from me. And the justification for that is because I am looking at all of the evidence. I won't be rushed. I've done this with the Windsor Framework before. I've done this with the NHS long-term plan. Obviously, the decision is then made in the next 24 hours, and we see it in his conference speech. And what it looks like is that you've ceded a huge amount of possible time and opportunity to convey your so-called vision in other areas in order to try and pause discussion or kind of block discussion on this thing that clearly a decision had been made about, but we aren't yet to hear it because it's been decided that we'd be hearing from it today. And that's been the difficulty, I think.
Right, well, Minister Johnny Mercer continuing with his warm-up speech ahead of Rishi Sunak taking to the stage. I mean, we should talk about the economy, cost of living. He is a former Chancellor, after all, when it comes to trust in what Rishi Sunak is going to say. Those pledges, those 5 missions he's made, 3 of them are around the economy, halving inflation by the end of the year and growing the economy. And as yet, no sign of him meeting those. That's what people will care about, is how it's going to impact them and cost of living issues and the money in their pocket.
Look, I'm very glad you brought up the economy. It is the top priority for all demographics, all regions of this country.
Sure.
Cost of living,
HS2
inflation.
could feed into that, of course, in terms of investment and
Maybe,
jobs and so on. But anyway,
but more of that is how people feel that in exactly the way you described, Jo, in their own families, in their own pockets. It is absolutely critical that the Prime Minister outlines for working people who are seeing real pressures to their earnings, that we can, with us, the Conservative Party, they have a better future.
Right.
That we have to be able to show people that despite the global pressures that have led to large inflation, despite energy price rises, all of those things...
They're the same pressures that other comparable countries have had. And our inflation, the rate at which prices are rising, is still at pretty near the top. Of the G7 country, it's still very high, Bim, and people are thinking, why should we trust the Conservatives?
Well, what I would say is I'm very critical of how the Bank of England has handled that, but I'm not making excuses. These things are difficult. The important thing is we are absolutely committed to bringing it down. That's why we're not likely to see a big promise on splurging massive tax cuts and huge income tax cuts, for example, to people, though a lot of people in the party are really desperate to hear that because, we cannot just pump lots of money into the economy because that may raise inflation. So we've got to focus on cost of living, make sure ordinary people get better earnings as we come through the next year and cost of prices in the shops comes down.
Well, we just saw Jeremy Hunt, actually, there in the audience, the Chancellor, Henry. But realistically, they're straitjacketed to some extent in terms of what they could do in the way Bim has just said, the Prime Minister and the Chancellor. People, are they really going to feel better off at a general election?
I mean, I think this is why we're getting things like the 20 miles per hour stuff, because the problem that the government has is that abstract stuff like, growth, like a few points of growth, doesn't connect to voters. And what they need is they need policies where voters can sort of tangibly go, oh, OK, Rishi Sunak's doing this, or, given what they've been trying to do, oh, my God, Keir Starmer's going to take away something I like. And so that's what those have been coming from. But it is going to be incredibly challenging.
All right, well, look, the video has started. Johnny Mercer has finished his speech. So we're getting ever closer to the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, taking to the stage. It's usually a couple of minutes for the video to run ahead of the party leader and the Prime Minister, in this case, going up to talk to the party faithful. Yeah, I mean, on the economy, it is the most important question, and it is the one that will be at the forefront of people's minds. Will I feel better off next year? And the answer, surely, at the moment, would be, well, no.
Yes, I mean, look, you're absolutely right. I think that the argument the government will make, or that the Prime Minister will make, is that he successfully got round some of the more challenging periods in Conservative rule over the last few years. And
so the Liz Truss, a year ago, we say Liz Truss, Kwasi Kwarteng, delivering the, his speech here, and then the budget that was so disastrous for them.
Yeah, and look, we're sitting in a very different place this year than we were this time last year at the Tory conference. So Rishi Sunak, I think, will argue that he turned things around. But you're absolutely right. If it comes to next year and things aren't a lot better, he's in trouble.
Here is Akshata Murty. So she is taken to the stage. Rishi Sunak's wife, obviously going to speak for a few minutes before her husband takes to the stage. Let's have a listen.
Good morning. And thank you. Okay. Well, I just got away with good morning. We're almost at good afternoon. But yes, you're absolutely right. I'm not on the agenda for today. A bit of a surprise addition, shall we say. And a surprise for my husband, too, who has no idea what I'm going to say. When I told our lovely girls, Krishna and Anushka, about being here today, they were also quite surprised. But look, the reason why I'm here is really quite simple. And it's because Rishi and I are each other's best friends. We're one team. And I could not imagine being anywhere else but here today with all of you to show my support to him and to the party. as you'd expect, there's been a lot about Rishi in the media, about who he is, what he likes, what he doesn't like, what motivates him, and so forth. Now, some of it is accurate. I'm afraid he does love a good rom-com. The cheesier, the better, even. And some of it is not so true. So you'll be relieved to hear that episodes of Emily in Paris are not informing his outlook on the EU. But in all seriousness, though, as we gather here today to look to the future of the UK, I'm so grateful to have this chance to talk to all of you about the man who is leading us there. Now, let me start with one word that sums up my husband, and that is aspiration. Aspiration runs through his DNA like it does this party's. Aspiration is what drove his family many years ago to move to the UK. And aspiration is what drives Rishi to build for a better country and a better life for all our young people to look forward to. Rishi and I met when we were 24, when we were both studying abroad in America. Right from the very beginning, I was struck by two things about him. No, not his smart suits or his love for hoodies. He actually didn't own either back then. But two much more important things. His deep love for his home, the United Kingdom, and his sincere desire to ensure as many people as possible have a chance to have the opportunities he was lucky enough to have had. It completely energized him. At the time, I wondered if this passion was just youthful optimism. Today, I'm not sure youthful optimism is a term you can still use about a man in his 40s. But Rishi's energy and passion for the future of this country are as strong as ever. That is why he has been a lifelong Conservative. That is why he entered politics almost a decade ago. And that is why it is the greatest honor imaginable for him to be Prime Minister, leading the country and the party he loves. As I said earlier, getting together with Rishi almost 20 years ago was not the easy route. It meant, in our early days together, a complicated, long-distance relationship. But let me tell you, on the other hand, being with Rishi was the easiest decision of my life. He's fun, he's thoughtful, he's compassionate, and he has an incredible zest for life. But what drew me to him most was his strength of character, his honesty, his integrity, with a firm understanding of right from wrong. It's what I'm still drawn to even today, after 14 years of being married. As you may know, Rishi is the son of a GP and a pharmacist. His parents moved to the UK from East Africa with very little, but they built here a life for themselves and for their children. For Rishi's dad, being involved in his patients' lives beyond the doctor's surgery was a big part of how he saw his role. Rishi's mum trained as a pharmacist, and years later, after saving enough to open her own shop, she too went above and beyond the call of duty to build deep-rooted relationships with her customers. It meant Rishi and his younger brother and sister grew up in a household entrenched in their community in Southampton, and they were wholly devoted to it. That love of community grew in Rishi too, from a very young age, as the most natural extension of how he sees home. And that connection with people is the source of his political life. Rishi cares deeply about this party and the values that underpin it. I would like to take this opportunity to thank you all for the support you've already shown him and for the warm welcome you've given our young family. Please know that Rishi is working hard to do the right thing for the country, not just for now, but for the long term, with honesty and with integrity. That is why he has told some hard truths already, and knowing him, he'll continue to do so. He shares your values, and he knows how much you care about the future of the UK, but also about the struggles and the challenges that people are facing today, and the potential we all see in a better tomorrow, not just for a few, but for everyone in our country. Just as with our girls, he wants the next generation to grow up in a country that offers them opportunity and hope, a country that helps them build rock-solid foundations, with a deep respect for hard work and the confidence to fulfill their potential, and a love for community in all its forms. Sometimes, when the going gets tough, I remind Rishi that he's fighting for his values, that he's fighting for this party's values, knowing that it's a hard road ahead, but success is hard won. Rishi, you know this. You know that doing the right thing for the long term, even when it's hard, is the right thing to do. And I hope you also know how proud you make our girls and me every single day. Conference, thank you for letting me gate crash to tell you a little bit more about the Rishi that I know and the Rishi that I hope most people will come to understand. Now, it gives me the greatest pleasure to introduce you to a wonderful, wonderful father, my best friend, and your Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak.
Unexpected. Akshata Murthy, wife of the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, in a very personal, almost touching speech about her husband, introducing him to party conference and the wider electorate. And here is the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, with his first speech to party conference as leader and Prime Minister.
Thank you. Thank you. Conference, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Thank you, Akshata, for that introduction, and thank you for always being there for me, my wife. Truly the best long-term decision for a brighter future I ever made. I've been blessed in my life. I have a wonderful wife and 2 daughters who make me proud every single day. And I was also lucky enough to grow up in the most loving of homes. My dad was a GP and my mum a pharmacist. You did need a smaller mention of the last summer, I know. Now, in so many ways, I wouldn't be standing here before you today without them. My mum and dad were and are my inspiration. Thank you, Mum. Thank you, Dad. Like so many of us in this hall, they understood the importance of community and made sure that I did too. They didn't believe community was some extension of government. Rather, they understood community is sustained by individuals, by those who look out for their neighbour, treat others as they would like to be treated. They understood the fundamental importance of service. It was seeing the difference they made to people's lives that made me want to go into politics. Now, my mother set up her own pharmacy. It was a proper family business. We all chipped in. As a teenager, I helped deliver prescriptions and do the books. I learnt there the importance of being able to meet your commitments and make good on your promises. And my parents are long retired now, but the Sunak pharmacy left me with a lasting respect for every small family business. This Conservative Party, the party of the grocer's daughter and the pharmacist's son, will always be the party of enterprise, the party of small business. I've been Prime Minister for almost a year now, and we have done good things in that time. We've made progress on our 5 priorities: to halve inflation, grow the economy, reduce debt, cut waiting lists, and to stop the boats. But today, I want to share with you my reflections on what I have seen and what I have learned doing this job. I have seen, up close, the quality of our armed forces and our intelligence services, truly the finest in the world. The debt of gratitude we owe them is why we are making this the best place to be a veteran. And I know we will deliver, because we have a Minister for Veteran Affairs sitting in Cabinet. Johnny served in Afghanistan. This is personal for him. He stood with his fellow soldiers in battle, and now he is ensuring that it is this Conservative government making our country fit for our heroes. We've backed our military with record investment. Working with Ben, a great defence secretary, we put the defence budget on a sustainable footing. And now Grant will ensure that our advanced AUKUS submarine alliance with Australia and the United States keeps the world safe for decades to come and creates jobs here at home. And through our leading role in NATO, we remain the bulwark of European security. All testament to this country's global reach and influence and our determination to take long-term decisions in the national interest. By contrast, just remember that not once, but twice, Labour tried to make a man Prime Minister who didn't believe in NATO, who would have surrendered our nuclear deterrent, and who blames Britain for every problem. Sir Keir Starmer might want us to forget about his repeated support for Jeremy Corbyn, but we never will. You can never trust Labour with our country's security. I'm proud to say we've also led the world in providing support to Ukraine. We were the first country to send Western battle tanks to Kyiv. Now more than 10 others have followed. We were the first country to send long-range weapons to Kyiv. Now France and the United States have followed. We were the first country to agree to train Ukrainian pilots. Now more than a dozen others have followed. I say this to our allies. If we give President Zelensky the tools, the Ukrainians will finish the job. Slava Ukraini! Doing this job, I meet and talk to inspirational men and women across our country. You see that our most potent strength, our most powerful resource, our greatest hope is our people. But what I've learned is that there is an undeniable sense that politics just doesn't work the way it should. The feeling that Westminster is a broken system, and the same goes for Holyrood, Cardiff Bay and Stormont. It isn't anger. It's an exhaustion with politics. In particular, politicians saying things and then nothing ever changing. And you know what? People are right. Politics doesn't work the way it should. We've had 30 years of a political system which incentivizes the easy decision, not the right one. 30 years of vested interests standing in the way of change. 30 years of rhetorical ambition which achieves little more than a short-term headline. And why? Because our political system is too focused on short-term advantage, not long-term success. Politicians spent more time campaigning for change than actually delivering it. It doesn't have to be this way. I won't be this way. Conference, our mission is to fundamentally change our country. Now, the Labour Party have set out their stall to do and say as little as possible and hopes no one notices. They want to take people's votes for granted and keep doing politics the same old way. It's a bet on people's apathy. It doesn't speak to any higher purpose or brighter future. It is about power for the sake of power. It is, in short, everything that is wrong with our politics. So if this country is to change, then it can only be us who will deliver it. Because if we do not, our growth will be stunted. More places will be left behind, and ever more of our time will be spent debating the side issues and symptoms rather than the deeper, more structural challenges we face. We won't allow this to happen. So where a consensus is false, we will challenge it. Where a vested interest is placing itself above the needs of the people, we will stop it. And where common sense is under attack from an organised assault, we will defend it. Today, I will set out how we will achieve this, beginning with a set of long-term decisions to build a brighter future for our children and to fundamentally change our country. And Conference, you can already see my approach in the course I charted on net zero. And we Conservatives love our natural world. We are determined to be good stewards of it. In my own constituency, it is the beauty of the North York Moors and Swaledale and Wensleydale that makes the place home. We Conservatives also value frankness and consent. We believe that politicians have a duty to treat household budgets with respect and that change only endures if we bring people with us. As you could tell by the reaction to my decision to chart a new course to net zero, it was not the easiest argument to have. But when I looked at the reality of what people were being asked to do, the thousands of pounds people would need to pay, all of that disproportionately falling on the poorest in society, by the way, and all of it not actually necessary in those time frames to meet our net zero targets, and in spite of us doing more than any other country, I concluded it simply wasn't right. So I decided to take a pragmatic, proportionate, and realistic approach to reaching net zero. And I won't take any lectures from other countries that have done far less than us, or from those for whom spending thousands of pounds means nothing. Change is difficult, particularly for those who disagree. But remember this, we will still meet our international obligations. We will still meet our domestic targets, and we will still get to net zero by 2050. We have solved a problem and offered an unapologetic defence of good Conservative common sense. So as much to the country, I make this promise to all of you in this hall. As I did last summer, I will tell it as it is. I will lead in a different way, because that is the only way to create the sort of change in our politics and in our country that we all desperately want to see. Now, I came into office in difficult circumstances, and I don't want to waste time debating the past, because what matters is the future. The facts are the facts. You can't borrow your way out of inflation. And if we want fundamental change in our country, we need a strong economy as a foundation. That is why halving inflation was the first and most important of the 5 priorities I set out at the start of the year. Everything we want to achieve requires getting inflation under control. Inflation is the biggest destroyer of all, of industry, of jobs, of savings, and of society. No policy which puts at risk the defeat of inflation, no matter its short-term attraction, can be right. Not my words, but those of Margaret Thatcher, as true now as they were then. I know you want tax cuts. I want them too, and we will deliver them. But the best tax cut we can give people right now is to halve inflation and ease the cost of living. And with inflation under control, our debt reduction will become easier. And as debt falls, confidence grows. And as confidence grows, so too will our economy. We need our economy to grow faster and for people across the country to feel the benefits of that. Like other Western economies, we haven't grown quickly enough in recent years. But don't let Labour and the others talk down our nation. We now know that we have had one of the fastest recoveries from the pandemic of any major economy in Europe. Since leaving the single market, we've grown faster than France and Germany, not despite Brexit, because of Brexit. We have the largest life sciences, financial services, creative and tech sectors in all of Europe, and we have near record numbers of people with the security that a job provides. And if we want to keep growing, we have to create the conditions in which businesses can drive growth, and that's exactly what we're doing. We still have the lowest corporation tax rate in the G7, and thanks to the Chancellor's business tax cuts, we are the best place to invest in the machinery and equipment that your business needs to grow. Innovation drives growth in a modern economy. So we also have the most generous tax regime for research and development in the G7. And our Brexit freedoms make us ever more competitive. From financial services to clinical trials to agriculture, we are creating a more agile regulatory system, freeing up businesses to drive the growth our country needs. The fact we control our own trade policy now is why we can be the first European country to join the £11 trillion Pacific Trade Pact, linking us to the fastest growing region in the world and opening up new markets for our farmers and great British products. We have new free ports, from the Firth of Forth to the Solent, ensuring the benefits of trade and investment are spread across our country. And thank you, Kemi, for cutting away Brussels red tape and saving small businesses £1 billion a year. Brexit was more than a vote to leave the EU. It was a vote to change, to become something more. It was a statement of our belief that Britain could begin a new story, one which reached all parts of our country and everyone in it. We must keep making the case for taking back control, because if we don't, our opponents will try and neuter this change, to align us with the European Union so that we never seize the full opportunities of Brexit. Now, we know where Keir Starmer's heart lies on this issue, and we know he can't be trusted on it either. First, he said he'd respect the referendum result. Then, he wanted a second referendum. Then, he wanted free movement. Then, he didn't. He said he wouldn't try and renegotiate our deal. Then, he said he would. And then just 2 weeks ago, he was caught on camera telling a meeting of international politicians that he now just wants to follow all the EU rules. The irony isn't lost on me. While we're busy thinking about the future of the United Kingdom, Keir Starmer's just banging on about Europe. You just cannot know what you're going to get with him. The only thing that is certain is that it won't be what he's promising you. But the worst thing about Sir Keir is that he just says whatever he thinks will benefit him the most. Doesn't matter whether he can deliver it. Doesn't matter if it's true. It doesn't matter if he said the opposite just a few weeks or months ago. He is the walking definition of the 30-year political status quo I am here to end. That is why we have to beat him, and conference, that is why we will. Now, if we are to create change and drive growth across our country, then we must get our infrastructure right. A false consensus has taken root that all that matters are links between our big conurbations. This consensus said that our national economic regeneration should be driven by cities at the exclusion of everywhere else. It said that the most important connections those cities could have was to London and not anywhere else. And it said that the only links that mattered were north to south, not east to west. What we really need, though, is better transport connections in the north. A new network north that will join up our great towns and cities in the North and Midlands. I wanted to come here to Manchester today to say that this will be our priority, our focus, our project. HS2 is the ultimate example of the old consensus. The result is a project whose costs have more than doubled, which has been repeatedly delayed, and it is not scheduled to reach here in Manchester for almost 2 decades, and for which the economic case has massively been weakened with the changes to business travel post-COVID. I say to those who backed the project in the first place, the facts have changed, and the right thing to do when the facts change is to have the courage to change direction. And so, I am ending this long-running saga. I am cancelling the rest of the HS2 project. And in its place, we will reinvest every single penny, £36 billion, in hundreds of new transport projects in the North and the Midlands across the country. This means £36 billion of investment in the projects that will make a real difference across our nation. As a result of the decision we are taking today, every region outside of London will receive the same or more government investment than they would have done under HS2, with quicker results. No government has ever developed a more ambitious scheme for northern transport than our new Network North. This is the right way to drive growth and spread opportunity across our country, to level up. With our new Network North, you will be able to get from Manchester to the new station in Bradford in 30 minutes, Sheffield in 42 minutes, and to Hull in 84 minutes on a fully electrified line. All right. Don't worry, there's more. We'll protect the £12 billion to link up Manchester and Liverpool as planned, and we'll engage with local leaders on how best to deliver that scheme. We'll build the Midlands Rail Hub, connecting 50 different stations. We'll help Andy Street extend the West Midlands Metro. We'll build the Leeds Tram. We'll electrify the North Wales Main Line, upgrade the A1, the A2, the A5, the M6. We'll connect... There is more. There's lots more. We'll connect our union with the A75, boosting links between Scotland and Northern Ireland. We will fund the Shipley Bypass, the Blythe Relief Road, and deliver 70 other road schemes. We will resurface roads across the country. We'll bring back the Don Valley Line. We will upgrade the Energy Coastline between Carlisle, Workington and Barrow. Build hundreds of other schemes and keep the £2 bus fare across the whole country. I challenge anyone to tell me with a straight face that all of that isn't what the North really needs. Our plan will drive far more growth and opportunity here in the North than a faster train to London ever would. As John Stevenson and Ben Houchen have long argued, East-West links are more important than North-South ones. Now, given how far along construction is, we will complete the line from Birmingham to Euston. And yes, HS2 trains will still run here to Manchester, and journey times will be cut between Manchester, Birmingham and London by 30 minutes. And I say this to Andy Street, a man I have huge admiration and respect for. I know we have different views on HS2, but I also know we can work together to ensure a faster, stronger spine, quicker trains, and more capacity between Birmingham and Manchester. The management of HS2 will no longer be responsible for the Euston site. There must be some accountability for the mistakes made, for the mismanagement of this project. We will instead create a new Euston development zone, building thousands of new homes for the next generation of homeowners, new business opportunities, and a station that delivers the capacity we need. And in doing so, for the first time in the life cycle of this project, we will have cut costs. The £6.5 billion of savings that Mark and I are making will be taken from the Euston site and given to the rest of the country. Now, the decision I have made and the stance I am taking will be attacked. They will say that halting it signals a lack of ambition. There will be people I respect, people in our own party, who will oppose it. But there is nothing ambitious about simply pouring more and more money into the wrong project. There is nothing long-term about ignoring your real infrastructure needs so that you can spend an ever larger amount on one grand project. They will say that we have already spent so much on it that it would be embarrassing to stop. That, though, would be an absurd reason to continue, an abdication of leadership. They will say that there is somehow a cross-party consensus on the project. As I have already said, that consensus is wrong. For too long, people in Westminster have invested in the transport they want, not the transport the rest of the country, particularly the North and the Midlands, wants and needs. And to those who disagree, who will focus on what I have stopped, I ask you to consider what we have just created with Network North, an alternative which, in place of one delayed and overrunning project, will now begin hundreds upon hundreds of new projects, large and small, road and rail, bus and train, covering the whole country, that will be delivered faster, that will see every region receiving more investment than they would have done. You can't have both. So those who wish to disagree with me, I respect that. But they should have the honesty to admit that they would now be cancelling the hundreds of alternative projects right across the country that people will benefit from instead. Conference, I think our plan is simply a better long-term investment of £36 billion of taxpayers' money. Now, we need to bring this willingness to make the right decision, not the easy one, to every aspect of our national life. The NHS is important to us all. It is the birthright of every person in this country. It was the NHS and social care staff who worked night and day to get us through the pandemic. Now, our commitment to the principle of an NHS free at the point of use is immovable. And this Conservative government is putting record resources into our NHS and social care too. But we Conservatives know that you don't measure your affection for the NHS just by how much money you put in, but how you reform it for the challenges ahead. I know that right now waiting lists are patients' most pressing concern. Just as in Scotland and Wales, they have risen because of the pandemic. And now strikes have led to more than 1 million cancelled appointments. Now, this is a reasonable government. We have negotiated and reached pay deals with over 1 million NHS workers, including nurses and hospital porters. We have met the recommendations of the independent pay review bodies for junior doctors and consultants in full. We have cut their taxes on their pensions as they requested. But they continue to demand massive, unaffordable pay rises, and that they have chosen to walk out this week says it all. This strike is all about politics, not patience. These strikes are not in the spirit of the NHS. This year we celebrate its 75 years of service, and one of my abiding aims as your Prime Minister is to set the NHS up for the next 75. True believers in the promise of the NHS wanted to reflect the world we live in today. That means a higher quality service that offers you, the patient, more choice, allowing you to use any provider, independent or NHS, free of charge if that will get you treated quicker. A common sense reform that this Conservative government has made. Now next, Steve and I want to give the NHS the staff it needs. For decades, we've not trained enough doctors and nurses. The result? The NHS either hiring staff from abroad or paying temporary agency workers huge fees. And we are ending that with the first ever long-term workforce plan for our health service. Let me repeat that. The first ever long-term workforce plan. It says everything about the short-termism of our politics, that for the last 75 years, not a single government has planned for how many doctors and nurses the NHS will need in the decades ahead. Our plan doubles the number of students training to be doctors and nurses, but it is also a reform plan for the NHS, with new ways of training and new roles, new ways of working, all driving up productivity. Now, I know vested interests will oppose some of these measures, but we Conservatives must do the right thing and make the changes that will enable the NHS to work as productively as the best healthcare systems anywhere in the world. And this is what a long-term decision really is. Given it takes up to 15 years to train a consultant, there's no politics in this investment. It's not about credit. It's about our kids and their kids. They'll get a much better and stronger NHS. And that's why we're here. That's why we Conservatives do what we do, up and down the country, from Whitehall to Town Hall. We're building a better future for the next generation. But to ease the more fundamental burden of demand on the NHS, we need more preventative care to stop people having to go to hospital in the first place. We must tackle the single biggest entirely preventable cause of ill health, disability and death, and that is smoking. In our country, smoking causes 1 in 4 cancer deaths. It kills 64,000 people a year and leads to almost 1 hospital admission every minute. It significantly increases the risks of strokes, heart disease, dementia and stillbirth. Now, we've made great progress in tackling smoking. The number of people smoking is down by 2/3 since the 1970s. But if we are to do the right thing for our kids, we must try and stop teenagers taking up cigarettes in the first place. Because without a significant change, thousands of children will start smoking in the coming years and have their lives cut short as a result. People take up cigarettes when they're young. 4 in 5 smokers have started by the time they're 20. Later, the vast majority try to quit, but many fail because they're addicted and they wish they had never taken up the habit in the first place. Now, if we could break that cycle, if we could stop the start, then we would be on our way to ending the biggest cause of preventable death and disease in our country. So I propose that in future, we raise the smoking age by 1 year every year. That means a 14-year-old That means a 14-year-old today will never legally be sold a cigarette, and that they and their generation can grow up smoke-free. Now, we know this works. When we raised the smoking age to 18, smoking prevalence dropped by 30% in that age group. When the United States raised the age to 21, the smoking rate dropped by 39% in that age group. Smoking places huge pressures on the NHS and costs our country £17 billion a year. We have a chance to cut cancer deaths by a quarter, significantly ease those pressures and protect our children, and we should take it. This is not a values judgment on people who smoke. I don't believe it would be fair to take away the rights of anyone to smoke who currently does so. And the vote on this in Parliament will be a free vote, as the bar on smoking in public places was, and raising the smoking age to 18 was. There will be no government whip. It is a matter of conscience. And I want you all and the country to know where mine is. For a Conservative, measures that restrict choice are never easy. I know not everyone in this hall will agree with me on this, but I've spent a long time weighing up this decision. Simply put, unlike all other legal products, there is no safe level of smoking. And what has ultimately swayed me is that none of us, not even those who smoke, want our children to grow up to be smokers. And this change can make that a reality. It will save more lives than any other decision we could take. And as any parent or teacher knows, one of the most worrying trends right now is the rise in vaping amongst children. 1 in 5 children have used vapes. We must act before it becomes endemic. So we will also bring forward measures to restrict the availability of vapes to our children, looking at flavours, packaging, displays, and disposable vapes. Now, as Prime Minister, I have an obligation to do what I think is the right thing for our country in the long term. And as Conservatives, we have never shirked that responsibility. We have always been at the front of society, leading it. And when we have the tools at our disposal to deal with the biggest cause of preventable illness and death in our country, to cut cancer deaths by 1/4, to significantly reduce long-term pressure on our NHS, and to do for our children what we all in our heart of hearts know is right, we must act, we must lead. Conference, we must put the next generation first, and that is what I will do. But all the boldness in the world will only mean so much if we can't similarly deal with matters of fundamental sovereignty, safety, and control. I'm talking, of course, about illegal immigration. It is non-negotiable that you, the British people, decide who comes here and not criminal gangs. Those gangs ply a trade that leads to innocent people dying. We have a moral duty to defeat this evil, and we will. Now, I've never pretended that stopping the boats will be easy. At the time I committed the government to delivering that goal, the consensus was simple. There was nothing we could do about it. They pointed to 4 years of growing crossings and said, impossible. Well, Conference, they were wrong. It is not impossible, and we are proving it. Small boat crossings are, for the first time since the phenomenon began, down 20% this year. All while entry into Europe is up. We are by no means where we want to be, but don't let anyone tell you we aren't making progress. We are, and we will get there. Our new law will ensure that if you come here illegally, you will be detained and swiftly removed. Now, I am confident that once flights start going regularly to Rwanda, the boats will stop coming. Just look at how our returns agreement with Albania has seen the numbers coming from there fall by 90%. I am confident that our approach complies with our international obligations. But know this, I will do whatever is necessary to stop the boats. Now, by contrast, Labour's plan is to cook up some deal with the EU, which could see us accepting around 100,000 of Europe's asylum seekers. If your answer to illegal migration is to increase it, you clearly just don't get it, and that is why we have to stop them. And that's because on this and on so many other issues, Labour simply don't share our and the country's values. My values are simple: service, family, work. I was brought up to understand the value of work. Work gives you security. Work gives you purpose. When the pandemic hit, we were faced with the prospect of 12 million people losing that security, that purpose, overnight. And once you're out of work, it can be hard to get back in. I wasn't prepared to cast 12 million people into that darkness. I'm proud that furlough not only prevented this, but helped ensure our economy recovered more strongly from the pandemic than France, Germany, and Japan. never forget the scale of what we did for so many. In 6 weeks, we did something that had never been done before, from scratch. I was told it wasn't possible, that it wouldn't work, but I got it done. Furlough was compassionate conservatism in action. If furlough was one thing that helped us get through COVID, then Ian Duncan Smith's welfare reforms were another. The old system could not have coped with the pressure in the way that his universal credit did. But we have more to do. We must end the national scandal where our benefit system declares that more than 2 million people of working age are incapable of actually doing any. That's not conservative. That's not compassionate. That must change. In 2011, 1 in 5 of those doing a work capability assessment were deemed unfit to work. But the latest figure now stands at 65%. Are people 3 times sicker today than they were a decade ago? No, of course not. It's not good for our economy. It's not fair on taxpayers who have to pick up the bill. And it's a tragedy for those 2 million people being written off. I refuse to accept this, and that is why we are going to change the rules so that those who can work, do work. Your values and your priorities should be expressed in everything the public sector does. Too often, it is not. In too many parts of our permanent state, virtue signalling has replaced common sense. As Suella has said, there is no such thing as a minor crime. If the police tolerate crime and antisocial behaviour in any form, we'll have more crime of all sorts. So that's why we now have record numbers of police officers. And every crime should be investigated. Our streets will be safer, our communities more secure. No one should be afraid to walk home alone at night. And our London mayoral candidate, Susan Hall, is doing a great job of holding Sadiq Khan to account for his failings on policing. Londoners, you will be safer with Susan. And I am clear, there are some crimes so heinous that those who perpetrate them should spend the rest of their lives behind bars. So I can confirm that we will legislate for sexual and sadistic murders to carry a full life term with no prospect of release. We are going to change this country, and that means life means life. Now, that shouldn't be a controversial position. The vast majority of hard-working people agree with it. And it also shouldn't be controversial for parents to know what their children are being taught in school about relationships. Patients should know when hospitals are talking about men or women. And we shouldn't get bullied. And we shouldn't get bullied into believing that people can be any sex they want to be. They can't. A man is a man and a woman is a woman. That's just common sense. We should also never be afraid to talk about the thing that matters most to most of us, family. Whenever you want to talk about family, someone whispers, "Is that wise, Prime Minister?" You'll be accused of promoting a one-size-fits-all view. But in this Conservative Party, the party that legislated for same-sex marriage and is investing record amounts in childcare, we know that what matters is that love cascades down the generations. It is family that cares for us at the beginning of our life. It is family that helps us learn. It is family that sustains us. And in old age, it is family that lightens the autumn of our days. Family matters. And as proud Conservatives, we should never be afraid to say that. And there's another family that matters to us all, our family of nations, England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. Today, our union is the strongest it has been in a quarter of a century. The forces of separatism are in retreat across our country. Nicola Sturgeon wanted to go down in the history books as the woman who broke up our country, but it now looks like she may go down for very different reasons. We are a remarkable combination of four nations with a proud history, and that history should give us enormous confidence in our future. My grandparents didn't emigrate to just Leicester or Southampton, but to the United Kingdom. They came here because our country stands for a set of values. We are the home of fair play, the best of British. We are the place for those who want to add to our national story. The United Kingdom has done a huge amount for my family. I often think about how different our lives would be if my grandparents had not left India and East Africa all those years ago. I owe our country everything. And it is my duty to do what I can to help this country take the right long-term decisions for the years ahead. The United Kingdom is also the most successful multi-ethnic democracy on earth. And our party has led the way on that. We had the first ethnic minority prime minister when Queen Victoria was still on the throne. We've had 3 female prime ministers, and I stand before you today as the first non-white leader in our country's history. Meanwhile, Labour's last 3 leaders all live within the same square mile of North London. Now, when the Richmond Conservative Association selected me in North Yorkshire, people in other countries couldn't understand it. One American magazine even sent a reporter to Yorkshire to write about how a candidate of the wrong race could cost the Tories one of the safest seats in England. But they should not have projected their own prejudices onto our country. The people of North Yorkshire were not interested in my colour, but my character. Never let anyone tell you that this is a racist country. It is not. My story is a British story. A story about how a family can go from arriving here with little to Downing Street in 3 generations. What does the Conservative Party offer a family of immigrants? The chance to become Energy Secretary, Business Secretary, Home Secretary, Foreign Secretary, even the chance to become Prime Minister. When I first became an MP, my grandfather came to Parliament to see me. As we stood in Westminster Hall on that floor which Disraeli and Churchill had walked across so many times, my grandfather suddenly got out his mobile phone and started to make a quick call. I was a new MP and I wasn't quite sure whether phones were allowed there or not. And I said, Nanaji, can't you just wait a moment? And he replied that he was calling the landlady he had when he had first arrived in this country. He said to me, I just wanted to tell her where I was standing. Now, I am proud to be the first British Asian Prime Minister, but you know what? I'm even prouder that it's just not a big deal. And just remember, it was the Conservative Party that made that happen, not the Labour Party. Now, if we want to change the direction of our country and to build a better future, nothing is more important than making our education system the best it can be. When our party came to power in 2010, our schools were slipping down international league tables. Now, they are rapidly rising. Of what we have done in government since 2010, what I am proudest of is our record on education. With Michael and Nick Gibb, we took on a failed ideology. We brought back proper knowledge. We empowered reformers. We gave parents more choice and helped them hold schools to account. But perhaps the most profound thing we have done is to disprove the idea that there is something predestined about who will succeed and who won't. We have state schools in some of the most deprived parts of the country producing some of the best results. These schools, empowered by reform, don't think that there are limits to these children because of the postcode they were born in. Rather, they demand, inspire, and deliver excellence. A Labour government would never have done this. Rather, Labour pursued the false dream of 50% of children going to university and abandoned apprenticeships. This assumption that the only route to success was the university route was one of the great mistakes of the last 30 years. It led to thousands of young people being ripped off by degrees that did nothing to increase their employability or earnings potential. So we are stopping universities from enrolling students on courses that do nothing for their life chances. Under us, no more rip-off degrees. And if you want to know how much I value apprenticeships, look at the fact that in Gillian, we have our first ever apprentice to be Education Secretary. Today, I want to build on these Conservative achievements and take a long-term decision to address the problems with our 16 to 19 education system. Technical education is not given the respect it deserves. Students don't spend enough time in the classroom. A quarter of our children leave education without the basic literacy and numeracy they need to fulfill their potential. And our students study too narrow a range of subjects. Today, I am changing all of that, pulling one of the biggest levers we have to change the direction of our country. We will introduce the new rigorous, knowledge-rich, advanced British standard, which will bring together A-levels and T-levels into a new single qualification for our school leavers. First, this will finally deliver on the promise of parity of esteem between academic and technical education, because all students will sit the advanced British standard. Second, we will raise the floor ensuring that our children leave school literate and numerate. Because with the Advanced British Standard, all students will study some form of maths and English to 18 with extra help for those who struggle most. In our country, no child should be left behind. Third, our 16 to 19-year-olds spend around a third less time in the classroom than some of our competitors. We must change this. So with our Advanced British Standard, students will spend at least 195 hours more with a teacher. And fourth, A-level students generally only do 3 subjects compared to the 7 studied by our economic competitors. The Advanced British Standard will change that too, with students now typically studying 5 subjects, and thanks to the extra teaching time that we are introducing, the greater breadth won't come at the expense of depth, which is such a strength of our system. Now, our new plan will require more teachers in the coming years. So I can announce today that in order to attract and retain more teachers, those who teach key subjects in schools, and for the first time in our further education colleges too, will receive special bonuses of up to £30,000 tax-free over the first 5 years of their career. Our teachers Our teachers do one of the most valuable jobs in our society, and we should reward them for that. And conference, I can tell you, my main funding priority in every spending review from now on will be education. Why? Because it's the closest thing we have to a silver bullet. It is the best economic policy, the best social policy, the best moral policy. It is the best way to spread opportunity and to create a more prosperous society. It is not just my way, conference, it is the Conservative way. I know times have been tough. We have all had to deal with unprecedented challenges. And I will be straight with you. We have mountains to overcome still. But today we have made 3 huge decisions to change the direction of our country. We will give Britain the infrastructure it needs, protect the long-term future of our NHS and cut cancer deaths by 1/4, and create the best education system in the Western world to set up our children for the opportunities of the future. If we commit, if we come together, we can achieve truly great things. We can build a country where work is truly valued, where welfare is a safety net and not a way of life, where small businesses drive our economy, where innovation makes life better, where our NHS is properly funded and properly reformed, where our children are the best educated in the Western world, whether that's at university or, yes, through an apprenticeship, where the scourge of antisocial behaviour is treated as the crime it is and not some social condition, where for the most violent offenders life means life, where the people and their government decides who comes here and who can't, where the next generation can achieve the dream of owning their own home, where the elderly grow old with dignity and where the young grow up with opportunity, where decency and mutual respect bind communities together, where the very idea of Britain is a symbol of hope and stability across the world, and where our United Kingdom remains united. All this and more is ours if we want it, but we have to fight for it. At the next election, the choice the people face is bigger than party politics. Do we want a government committed to making long-term decisions, prepared to be radical in the face of challenges and to take on vested interests? Or do we want to stand still and quietly accept more of the same? You either think this country needs to change or you don't. And if you do, you should stand with me and every person in this hall. You should stand with the Conservatives. Today, this party put the needs of the British people first. We've taken the decision many should have done, but didn't. We've ended the HS2 drama and in its place will embark on a full-scale national reinvestment in the infrastructure people actually use and want and the skilled workforce who will build it. And no more hiding. No more pretending in the face of overwhelming evidence. Too many sons and daughters, fathers and mothers are lost to lung cancer, heart disease, dementia, stillbirth, and we can change that. Today, we went beyond ideology and put the people first again and committed ourselves to ensure our children and grandchildren can be the first generation that doesn't have to suffer the false choice to quit smoking or not because they will never have started. Today, we set a course for our education system that will set our children up for the opportunities of the future. No more rip-off degrees, no more low aspiration, no more denigration of technical education, just the best education system in the Western world. We will be bold, we will be radical, we will face resistance, and we will meet it. We will give the country what it so sorely needs and yet too often has been denied. A government prepared to make long-term decisions so that we can build a brighter future for everyone. Be in no doubt, it is time for a change, and we are it. Thank you.
Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, ending his long conference speech to be joined by his wife, Akshata Murthy, who introduced him with her own very intimate personal style about them, their family, how they met, and his values. He set out, first of all, the decision that had clearly been made and that we have talked about really all week. And that is, as he said, I'm cancelling HS2 high-speed rail, the leg from Birmingham to Manchester. And he set out what will happen instead, or the promises that his government will make in terms of reinvesting the £36 billion that will be saved into infrastructure and transport projects, not just in the north of England, but right across the country. But the theme of his speech and what he was trying to set out was that he is and can be the change candidate for the Conservatives, despite his party having been in power for 13 years. And despite, as he says, that over the last 30 years, politics hasn't worked the way it should. 13 years of those under successive Conservative governments. There were some announcements, but much of it we already knew. He covered a whole range of topics across government, including education, made an announcement about raising the smoking age and about preventative health, and again about his own identity and success that his family have had in this country. Let me bring in our guests, Lara Spirit from The Times, Henry Hill from Conservative Home, who are listening to that speech with me as we will keep watching the pictures of Rishi Sunak and his wife being greeted and congratulated by members inside the conference hall. Lara, what did you make of it?
Well, it's interesting, like you say, that a number of the main packages in this speech that we've saw and we've heard much of in recent days already. So you can't move here in Westminster and Manchester for mention of the future of HS2. This had been long expected since we've been here, that major announcement that we saw today. But we also had a flavour in recent days of the smoking ban that had been very rumoured to be coming in to try and stop future generations from smoking, and also of those education packages. Now, the question, of course, is, was that brought together in some form of a coherent whole? Was that repackaged in order to have this kind of thread running through it whereby we could tell what Rishi Sunak's vision would be? We know what the pitch could be in the next election. We heard from people before saying, I want to know what it's going to be in the next election. What will the message be? And I think one of the abiding things that came out of that is the real focus on education. We've heard the precise wording around a silver bullet, the fact that the Prime Minister believes that that is the closest thing that we have. You know, silver bullet is crucial, that he wants to invest more in schools. And we've also known his long-running ambition to move towards some form of British baccalaureate in the system that we saw. So it was not absent new measures, but questions particularly around HS2 and where that money will be going remain, and how the government is able to answer that in the coming days will be the most crucial thing.
Well, as Lara said, it's the how. It's the how is he going to do the many things that he promised in that speech. Many of the announcements people will agree with, perhaps on smoking. I know you don't particularly agree with it, but again, on raising standards in schools. But the questions will be asked about the how.
The absolutely fascinating one is he's like, no more rip-off degrees. Now, that's a big ask, depending if you define those how the government defines them, right, which is a degree which doesn't end up giving someone a salary boost. But how are you going to do that exactly? Are you going to shut those courses down? Are you going to stop people going to university? Like there's nothing there, and that's quite a big announcement. And I also found it fascinating. We were talking about education. He stood up and he said, one of the things I'm proudest of is our record on education. And then what did he do? The Conservatives have put a lot of work into developing T-levels, a separate, discrete, ideally high-status qualification for technical education. That's getting rolled back into a general qualification. And then he attacked the narrowness of the curriculum, when, of course, it was Michael Gove who fought very hard to deliver the English baccalaureate.
I mean, isn't that the problem at the heart of that speech? That actually so much of what Rishi Sunak said is in opposition to what had been brought in by his predecessors, not just prime ministers, Conservative prime ministers, but Conservative governments on a whole range of areas of government.
Yeah, absolutely. And he kept saying we're going to do things, we've done politics differently for 30 years, but this isn't a different sort of politics. This is a series of announcements, right? Which is how we've always governed. I was expecting, well, not expecting, hoping that he might dig into why those bad decisions were made and explain how he was going to make decisions differently. There wasn't any of that in this speech.
Right, well, let's get some reaction from people who were inside the hall. Grassroots party activists. Our correspondent Helen Catt is there.
Thanks, Jo. And actually, we've managed to catch up with Vivek, who we spoke to just before he went in. I mean, you told us what you wanted out of that speech. Did he deliver it?
He actually delivered more than what we expected from him. He delivered about the HS2. He delivered about the young generation, about the vaping, about the smoking habits. So he's going to bring it down. He talked about the education. So he's going to now bring the education in the heart of the Conservative. So all these things he definitely delivered.
So you're happy with all of that, everything he said?
I'm quite overwhelmed, I'm quite happy, and I have full faith in his leadership, and I fully believe that he's going to deliver to what British people need, and he's going to make us win in the next election.
Brilliant, thank you. We'll try and find out, we'll let you go and find some other people to speak to. Yes, please, you're live on the BBC. What did you make of that?
I thought it was one of the most aspirational speeches I've heard from a Prime Minister, and I've been coming to the conference for a very long time. Reforms in education, reforms in the health service, reforms to HS2. There was an awful lot in that speech. A really great speech.
You seem pretty pleased. And can I ask your opinion? What did you make of it?
I thought it was sensational, absolutely amazing, really uplifting, and
what made you feel like that about him?
He's really, I mean, he's only been there for such a short time. He's taken on a very difficult position, and he's thought about everything and ways of overcoming it. Yeah.
And, did that surprise you, or did you expect him to deliver that?
It did and it didn't, because we always know that he was quite amazing. I mean, Geoffrey said, when he went for his interview at Richmond, Geoffrey had recommended a different candidate.
Oh, really?
And
dear.
And when the people of Richmond came back to him, they said, no, this person has arrived that is just amazing. He blew us away. And I think he has done that.
So do you think...
The best bit I liked about it was the aspiration for our youngsters. Education, as he said, is the silver bullet. And the bit at the end there said, if you want the country to change, if you believe in change, you've got to stick with Rishi, because he is the person who's going to change the country.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm going to try and speak to some other people as they go. Thank you very much.
Oh, hello. We seem to have lost the line there, but Helen Catt talking to members and MPs outside the hall after Rishi Sunak's speech. I mean, just picking up on that phrase there, reforms to health, reforms to education, reforms to Conservative health policies, reforms to Conservative education reforms. Isn't this just the problem that Rishi Sunak has got to get over? That what he's doing to some extent is rewriting previous Conservative government's policies?
Well, it's a dilemma, of course, because if you are 20 points behind in the polls, the big concern is that you need to set out change. Obviously, when some of the people who enacted that change are still sitting there as some of your cabinet ministers having to applaud the change being brought in and their previous record being disavowed in front of them, that's quite a difficult gamble to make. And whether or not people actually believe that in Rishi Sunak they feel that they've seen a clean break and a clear start on a different kind of politics, I think it's not necessarily clear what the working way to get towards that very different politics actually is. And the key thing, I think, with this is that Rishi Sunak says he's going to come in for criticism with the High Speed 2 decision, for example.
But some people will like it.
But he's not saying that it's unpopular. He's not saying that he thinks it's going to lose the election. But there's this weird kind of tension, I think, between the fact that he's announcing measures which he both wants to persuade MPs can still help him win the election, but he also wants to say is him doing politics very differently, taking long-term difficult decisions towards a longer-term view. I think that's quite a difficult tension.
Well, it is difficult. I mean, we'll see what happens over the coming months and when a general election is finally announced. Just sort of referencing a year ago, I mean, he mentioned tax cuts, and we will deliver them. Obviously, no sign or indication of when. There could be, I suppose, a pre-election offer from the Chancellor of some sort of tax cut next year. And also house building. When he's talking to Aspiration and to young people, there wasn't any mention of it.
That was the gaping wound, gap at the heart of this speech. I've been to Tory conference the whole time. Housing is actually really on the agenda at this conference. There have been loads of packed fringe events where you've even had ministers and Tory MPs, you know, at least conceding that there is a major problem here. And yet, for someone who claims to be making the big, long-term, difficult decisions, not a single mention of housing, not even one. It's absolutely extraordinary. And it's the same with his net zero stuff. You know, when he made that speech, he was like, I'm making the difficult decisions about net zero. The reason we weren't going to hit the net zero target is because the grid wouldn't be ready, because we wouldn't build any pylons. Did he go out and say, actually, we are going to have to build a load of pylons through Tory seats? No, he didn't. He's not actually the really hard long-term decisions for this country on infrastructure, on housing.
Planning.
He's not making. He's not making them. This speech could have been a really big tee up to planning reform, but there's just nothing at the end of it.
What about the personal side of it? We had quite a lot about Rishi Sunak, husband, father, the man, as well as the Prime Minister. Aspiration, yes, that was the word that was used by his wife, the one word to describe Rishi Sunak. What did you make of that sort of approach?
It was a very personal approach, and I'm sure that we will hear a lot about the idea that it was very new. I would also say, having attended quite a few of the Conservative leadership hustings debates last year, that I have heard Rishi Sunak speak about family values, and about his, family's pharmacy and that history quite a few times. That is not necessarily in and of itself new, but what he wants to do is tie very explicitly and clearly the language of what he believes is conservative aspiration, that's something that he thinks his party cares deeply about, and his own personal history and ideals and values.
Right, and that story, of course, he also linked his success, British Asian Prime Minister, and pointed to other members of his cabinet and 3 female Prime Ministers. He referenced Margaret Thatcher. Every Conservative leader references Margaret Thatcher at some point.
Our Lady of Iron.
As contrast to the Labour Party. Of course, he had a lot to say about Keir Starmer and why people shouldn't vote for the Labour leader. Do you think that sort of resonated?
I mean, it is something that Conservatives take quite a bit of smug satisfaction in, that actually their record on diversity is so much greater. Of course, we could also throw in Benjamin Disraeli, who of course was the Jewish Prime Minister. But it's funny because he simultaneously said, the thing I'm proudest of is that it's not a big deal that I'm the first British Asian Prime Minister. And then he made a big point of it, and he made a big point of attacking Labour for where their leaders represent in Parliament. So he's really trying to have his cake and eat it, which is, of course, Boris Johnson's great political tactic. So maybe it will work. But I don't think you can really say, my race doesn't matter, and also, my God, look at Labour, aren't they doing really badly on this?
Right, I mean, in terms of the polls, it'll be interesting to see what the reaction is and how people actually viewed the speech outside of the hall. Was there enough there for the wider electorate?
Well, I think that's one of the interesting things, is that last year when we watched Liz Truss rail against the anti-growth coalition, there was, of course, a single attack point for Liz Truss. It felt like more of a rallying cry. This time around, there is, of course, the opposition of Keir Starmer. We did hear quite a bit about that today. He thinks that Keir Starmer represents apathy, that he's not going to be able to represent a new form of politics. But we'll have to see what the polls show. A 20-point deficit on average is a very, very big deficit for the government to be able to close. Whether or not they see in Rishi Sunak's speech a clear plan to do that, I think, remains to be seen.
Let's welcome Jackie Doyle-Price, Conservative MP. Nice to see you here on Politics Live, following on the speech. What did you make of it, first of all?
It was great. It was just what I wanted to hear.
What was it? Which bit?
Well, the whole thing. We've finally seen what a Rishi Sunak new government would look like. for the last year, we've had obviously so much drama post-Johnson and everything that happened last year. He had to settle the horses, but now he's set out his stall. It's all about getting education opportunity right for young people, which is the most important thing. Music to my ears, we're going to get rid of these crappy degrees that waste so much of people's money.
What about HS2? I mean, that is all we've talked about, really, this week, amongst other things as well, too. But that announcement, cancelling that big infrastructure project that was coming here to Manchester and doing it in Manchester.
From London. It is an absolute example of London-centric policy making. The truth is, if we could have everything, we'd build everything. We can only build what we can afford. The most important thing, so if levelling up really means anything, it's connecting all those cities in the north. And frankly, from my perspective, as someone who was originally from Sheffield, for me, it was always the wrong way around. But it was all about speed to London. Actually, it's not. It's about capacity. And that's what he's announced today is much more bang for our buck, in truth.
Right.
With much more connectivity.
So you are supportive of the decision to cancel it?
I'm supportive of the best value for money we can get from investing in infrastructure. Ideally, I'd like to do it all, but I would rather prioritise those northern connections before linking up to London.
Right, £36 billion that's going to be saved and invested in infrastructure projects. It's not all going to the north of England. You must be disappointed in that.
No, it's going in capacity, in more capacity. Now, I represent a constituency in the south, just outside London. We needed more capacity on the rail network to enable the stuff that comes through the ports in Thurrock to be transported by rail, not road. And that was what HS2 was going to deliver for us. It was to relieve capacity elsewhere. We will still get that by this investment.
What do you think when Andy Street, the Conservative Mayor for the West Midlands, says it's an incredible political gaffe that allows every Labour politician in the north of England to say that, in his words, the Tories came to Manchester to shaft the north?
Well, I would say, firstly, Andy Street represents a seat in the Midlands, so he will see things from a very, very different perspective.
He's the Mayor of the West Midlands.
He's the Mayor of the West Midlands.
Right.
But he's not speaking for the North, he's speaking for the West Midlands. He's being a good representative and a good advocate for his community. Obviously, it's not the best option for him, but we as a government have to govern in the best interest of the nation, and what we've got here is...
All right, Jackie Doyle-Price, thank you very much for joining us. Let's talk to Richard Holden, who is a Transport Minister. Thank you very much for joining us. The central mission of this government, Richard, was meant to be levelling up. And the key part of that was delivering HS2 from London to the north of England. Where did it all go wrong?
I think what you're actually seeing today is a recognition of the facts on the ground, a recognition of the fact that things have changed with COVID, the dynamics of the economy have changed, but also that what we want to see is cash right into communities right across the country. This isn't just about connecting central Manchester to central Birmingham, although that'll be faster. It's not just about connecting central Manchester to central London, although that will be half an hour quicker.
But my question is, where did it all go wrong with HS2?
Well, I think you've seen actually massive inflation over the last few years. One of the kickers of that has been the war in Ukraine. You've seen prices in the supermarkets going up by around, this gentleman can shake his head, but you can, actually prices in the supermarkets have gone up by around 10%. In construction costs, that's more like 3 times that. And I want to see a mass transit system for Leeds. I want to see a massive rail investment across the north of England. I want to see 70 rail projects.
To levelling up, yes, you're going through all of the promises. We don't know whether they'll be delivered, of course, because you've just cancelled a very big, major infrastructure project. So let's concentrate on the promise that's been broken. You accept it's been broken, that your commitment to levelling up is in tatters.
That's absolute nonsense. What we are doing is putting cash into the communities right across the country. The idea that you would plough ahead with one project connecting the centre of major cities, right, when it's quite clear that the economic case for that has massively changed over the last few years...
Well, you say it's massively changed over the last few years, but hang on, let's just quote Rishi Sunak, because he said, we are going to hold and make accountable the mismanagement of HS2, the spiralling costs, the tens of billions of pounds. Who is responsible for the mismanagement?
Well, you can see quite clearly, right, what we want to do now is we're looking at the Euston project in its entirety.
No, you're not answering my question. Who is responsible for the mismanagement? When Rishi Sunak says we are going to make people accountable, it's government, isn't it? It's people who have been chancellors. It's the Treasury.
What I would say is you're looking at all parts of this project. One of the biggest parts of this project is around Euston, where the government's trying to review the cost of it, and then we came back with a proposal which was even more expensive. It's quite clear that that's not a goer. What I want to see is, and what the government wants to see, is that investment delivering for communities right across the country, whether that's the A1 or whether that's Network Rail across the north, whether it's a new Bradford station which is now going to be created, whether it's the first metro transit system for Leeds, the largest city in Europe without one, that can all now go ahead.
Why should we believe that any of this will get done after a government, a Prime Minister who has just cancelled and scrapped one of the biggest infrastructure projects? No, I mean, it has been scrapped. The high-speed rail from Birmingham to Manchester, to this city here, has been scrapped. Andy Burnham, the Labour Mayor of Greater Manchester, says this decision sends a very clear message to people in the north of England, which is that they are second-class citizens when it comes to transport.
Well, you can Andy Street, I've just said, well, hang on, but Andy Street, who's Conservative... £12 billion for a connection between Manchester and Liverpool, tens of billions of pounds for a rapid transport connection system right across the north, £1.75 billion for Leeds upgrades there.
What's the guarantee it will happen, Richard?
Well, let me explain why. Because we're saying where the money's coming from. And that's the crucial thing here. We're saying where the money's coming from. The money's coming from the HS2 project now. Well, one of the reasons is you can see why, over a very long-term project like HS2, not even delivered till 2042 here to Central... Wait a second. To Central Manchester, right? Of course you're going to see real concerns around cost because you can't forecast that far in advance. When you're delivering quicker projects, like we're wanting to do now, particularly when you're looking at a shorter time horizon, you have greater certainty on the costs. So actually, I think what you're looking at is real delivery.
Well, let's get some reaction. Henry, are you convinced by that?
I mean, no. If politicians want to look at what went wrong with HS2, ultimately they need to look in the mirror, right? Like, the HS2 was forced to cost the initial project before the bill was passed, before they'd even seen the land. MPs added thousands of additional requirements, put half of it in tunnels to preserve views in Tory MPs' constituencies. Yes, there have been other factors like inflation, but the other thing is, we think about the economic case for a railway. The West Coast Main Line was built by the Victorians. The idea that a change of a few years completely changes the idea for the economic case for a major rail project is nonsense. It's going to be there if we built it. It'll be there for 100 years, and it would more than pay for itself if we finished it. It's embarrassing that we have failed to do so.
Well, why shouldn't voters hold you and your government accountable?
I want them to hold us accountable, Jo, for this decision today. I want them to understand that we've had to make a difficult choice of the decisions we're taking. We either invest in a panoply of projects, 70 smaller road projects, the massive rail project of Network North. I want them to say, look, the government's been faced with this decision here today. Yeah. What does it think is in the best long-term interest of the country? A speedier connection between central Manchester and central Birmingham, or massive transport infrastructure investment across the Midlands and the North.
If it happens, but when Rishi Sunak, I repeat again, hang on, when Rishi Sunak, well, yes, cancelling things. I mean, the problem is...
Judges by our actions. Look at what we've done in Manchester. We talked about the Ordsall Accord since the 1970s, delivered under this government. Electrification of Preston to Manchester Victoria, delivered under this government. Look at the A66 upgrade.
Who is accountable now? Who should voters hold accountable for this cancellation?
I want voters to hold us accountable for this decision, because this is a decision between two alternatives. Yeah. One is massive transport infrastructure.
He said they were mistakes. Who made those mistakes? Five Conservative Prime Ministers, 7 Conservative Transport Secretaries.
And the facts have changed.
Accountability for the mistakes made. Who do you hold accountable?
And the Prime Minister said it himself. When the facts change, what do? You can either plough on with the continuing of this project, right, despite everything else, or you invest £36 billion in transport schemes right across the north of England and Midlands, right, delivering transformational changes for towns and cities right across the country.
All right. What do you make of what you've heard from Richard? When it comes to accountability, who should the voters hold accountable for the cancellation of this project?
Well, this will be the really interesting question, is whether or not the government is successful in landing the case that this is not seen as a policy failure or the government scrapping one of its flagship infrastructure proposals, seen as the heart of the levelling up agenda that was also seen as crucial to their victory in the last election. If, like Richard Holland is trying to do now, the government is able to convince voters that in that place, you will have an improved level of investment in infrastructure, particularly in the Midlands and the North, then that might wash. But if we come away from this conference with the main message being that one of the flagship proposals of this government has been axed, then that might be more difficult for them.
William Ragg, senior Tory figure. The only thing worse, he's tweeted, than a white elephant is half of one. Hashtag HS2. What do you say to him?
Well, I mean, William's stepping down at the next election, and it's, you know, I think he's probably got a bit of levity to say what he'd like. I think the key thing here is, though, you're seeing HS2 is going to still see half an hour a reduction in journey times between Manchester and London, and you're going to see, instead of that city centre even faster connection, you're going to see £36 billion invested right across the Midlands and North in transport projects people have wanted for decades and haven't been delivered.
We've run out of time, but thank you to all of our guests here, and that is all for today and from the Conservative Party conference here in Manchester. I'll be back tomorrow with more Politics Live at 12:15 on BBC Two and the iPlayer. Maybe HS2 will get a mention. Bye-bye.